Well, even though I managed to avoid talking about it for a couple of days, it looks like time and social media has caught up with me. So now it looks like I'm going to have to burn a solid segment on talking about Cannon Hinnant. Does anybody know who Cannon Hinnant is? If you don't, you will recognize the memes about him, I am sure. Let me show you who Cannon Hinnant is. Cannon Hinnant apparently was a 5-year-old boy who got shot in his front yard by a black man. Now, this happened, I want to say, 4 or 5 days ago. And since then, social media has been completely inundated with Cannon Hinnant. So I'm going to tell you the story about Cannon and how Cannon got killed and how this disgusting abomination came to be and how the right and the conservatives have somehow managed to sink even lower in their quest to demonize and delegitimize any sort of call for justice from black or brown people. Here we go. 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant was shot and killed while riding his bike in front of his home in North Carolina, but 1 week after his death, police have not said what the motive was. 25-year-old neighbor has been arrested and charged with the murder. Austin Hinnant, Cannon's father, said that he and his family, including his 3 children, his fiance, had come home from church when the kids said they wanted to play outside. A few minutes later, he heard a gunshot. I flew out my front door, and the first thing I see is my son laying on the ground. I had to scoop my son up and hold him in my arms as his blood ran down my arm, and all I could do was pray to God. Cannon, who was just about to start kindergarten, was shot in the head and died on the way to a nearby hospital. Police identified the shooting suspect as Darius Sessions, a neighbor who Hinnant said had dinner with him the night before. They also shared a beer on the front porch. Quote, I have no idea why he would kill my son in front of his 2 sisters and cousins. There was never anything between me and him, any bad blood whatsoever, for him to have a reason to do this. Hinnant said the two were neighbors for about 8 years. The night before the shooting, Hinnant said he'd been grilling chicken and invited Sessions when he noticed he looked like he had a lot on his mind. Quote, he seemed paranoid that he thought, quote, a lot of people were trying to set him up. He said, I don't know what it was about, but it looked like he was paranoid. This is the mugshot of Darius Sessions, who was arrested for the murder. The Raleigh News and Observer reported Sessions had a criminal record that included time in prison. Sessions was charged with first-degree murder. Conservative and right-wing media sites have seized on Cannon's brutal and unexplained killing, claiming it is an example of media bias because Cannon is white and his suspected killer is black. The hashtag Say His Name, which grew out of the movement to draw attention to police killings of black people, was also used with Cannon's name. Although the shooting was covered widely in local and state media, outlets like Breitbart called out national outlets Thursday for not covering the shooting. So, an innocent white child is essentially executed by a black man in his front yard. It is a horrible, disgusting, heinous crime. It is like the worst kind of thing that could happen. In front of other kids, like his siblings, and his dad, 10 feet away, yet powerless to stop it. The whole thing is ridiculously horrible. Police mobilized. They got together with the Marshal Service. They did what police do. They found him within 8 hours. They brought him in. They questioned him. They arrested him. They charged him with first-degree murder. He was arraigned. He was denied bail. And he is now going to sit in prison for the next 1 to 3 years until the case actually comes to trial. That's the cycle of justice in America. In America, that is literally the best you can hope for. But because he was a white child and the killer was black, And there are a slew of people out there who absolutely loathe the concept of Black Lives Matter and loathe the idea of black people protesting because they get killed by the system and they get killed extrajudicially by police. And they're protesting because they don't want to be murdered in the streets anymore. White conservatives have decided to, quote, flip the script and are now throwing this back in the face of Black Lives Matter, black people, protesters, etc., and saying, you want to complain when black people get killed. Look, this is a beautiful, innocent white child who was just executed. Where's his justice? Where's justice for little Cannon? They're like, he was, did you miss the last part that I just said? The part where I told you the police assembled a task force with U.S. Marshals and they found him inside of 6 hours. They brought him in, they questioned him, they charged him, they arraigned him. He's being held without bail. That's literally justice. That is the concept of justice in America. In America, that's peak justice. If you remember, after George Floyd got killed, on fucking cell phone video, which everybody in the world got to watch, they didn't arrest the people who killed him until they burned a police station to the ground. Okay? And then they grudgingly arrested those dudes. Okay? That's the difference between justice being served and demanding and having to scratch and claw for justice. Yet somehow these two are supposed to be the same thing if you are a racist or a white nationalist or a white conservative who hates Black Lives Matter and thinks that everything that you don't like is Marxism, then I'm sure that this makes sense. On Fox News, Raymond Arroyo, who was stepping in for Laura Ingraham on the Ingraham Angle, falsely suggested there was no outrage over Cannon's death. Cannon, a white child, was allegedly executed in front of his siblings by a 25-year-old black man and convicted felon, Arroyo said with a chyron that read, "Where is outrage over slaying of Cannon Hinnant?" See, everybody is outraged by death and murder. Every time somebody is murdered, people are like, holy crap, I can't believe somebody just got murdered. Like, the simmering outrage that continues after the death of somebody is when the state doesn't do its job and justice isn't served. See, the rule of law applies equal application to all people. If the rule of law is not equally applied to everybody, then the rule of law is essentially meaningless. So when people are protesting after a black person gets killed by cops and the cops aren't arrested, Breonna Taylor. Oh, sorry, I had some racism stuck in my throat there. Where were we? Oh, yeah. So every time the state executes somebody and then there is no justice, i.e. there is no investigation, nobody gets arrested, nobody gets convicted, yes, then that is people who are still demanding justice. Days, weeks, months, years after somebody has been killed. Cannon's killer was caught inside of 6 hours, as he should be, because he's a person who shot a child in the head. It is obviously a threat to everybody, and them arresting him was probably the right move. I mean, that's their job, right? But no. You're supposed to be outraged over Cannon getting killed. So if you're not outraged over every last person who gets killed, then at some point you must be a garbage person because you're not outraged by, murder number 1822, even though you were outraged by murder 1821. So no, people are appalled and outraged by murder. Like, you can take that off the table because it's outrageous. The things that people continuously protest for weeks and months after a killing is because nobody is arrested for murdering somebody after the murder is on video and put all over the internet and hundreds of millions of people around the world see it and they still don't arrest anybody. That's why people protest. A guest on the show, Pastor Darrell Scott, told Arroyo that Cannon's death, quote, is a result of this atmosphere of racial hatred and hostility towards white people that is being promoted by the ultra-radical left, by the Black Lives Matter organization, and also by extension, the Democratic Party. Yes, because when I think the ultra-radical left, I think the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party. They're ultra-radical. They also approved every single one of Trump's military spending plans without a single fight. But okay, yeah, the ultra-radical left, led by Nancy Pelosi, who I'm sure has a black bandana and puts it on and smashes out Starbucks windows on May Day along with the rest of the Antifas. Yes, that seems totally likely and not absurd at all. However, police have given no indication about what the motive of the shooting was or suggested it was racially motivated. Cannon's parents and grandmother did not respond to requests for comment, but had told multiple news outlets that they don't know why the 5-year-old was shot, and they don't believe it was racially motivated. Quote, "This is no racial issue," Hinnant told Wilson Times. His grandmother, Gwen Hinnant, said that although she felt her grandson's death merited more attention, the killing was not racially motivated. Cannon's mother, Bonnie Waddell, also wrote in a Facebook post referring to George Floyd, quote, "A black man who was killed after a Minneapolis police officer knelt on his neck, quote, this has absolutely nothing to do with race and do not compare this to Floyd." Okay, so Cannon's parents, Cannon's father, who literally held him while he was bleeding out with a bullet in his head, goes on a camera and says, this is not a racial issue. Cannon's mother, who's bereaved, literally has to type in all caps on the internet, "This has nothing to do with race. Do not compare this to Floyd." But what's the first thing that these conservative dickbags go out and do? And these fucking low-key white nationalist racists, what's the first thing they do? They do exactly what the parents of the child who just got killed beg them not to do. Why? Because their outrage about black people protesting against cops is more important than the wishes of two parents whose child was just murdered, because their ideological beliefs and, you know, the things they meme about and the things they shake their fist at are more important than the actual death of an actual child and the actual suffering of the people directly involved. Well played, racist assholes. Well played. This even got so bad, the police department had to put out a story on the local news warning people about fake posts that were claiming any number of things, such as the father was a meth dealer and the next door neighbor came over to get meth and they got into a fight and that's why he executed the kid. Like, there were a whole bunch of, there was somebody who went out and made an entire fake page of the local police department and then started putting up posts on it. That's how bad it was, because everybody wants to control the narrative. Oh, wait, there's a chance here that we can show those blacks that they're not special. Let's go out of our way to do things like make Facebook posts impersonating police officials. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Let's go out and make fake Facebook pages of police departments and police sergeants and then put out false press releases because we want to control the narrative that badly and take some wind out of the sails out of those pesky black people who won't stop yelling. Stop conflating a heinous individual tragedy with the fight against systemic injustice, and stop using a child's gruesome murder to discredit or demean or deflect from a social justice movement. There is little doubt that justice will be done in Cannon Hinnant's case. By all means, be outraged that this little boy was murdered, but direct that outrage at his murderer, not at all the individuals and groups calling for justice to be equally applied to all. Say his name if it makes you feel better, but don't politicize his death to hijack the movement for racial justice. Call for justice in a case where justice is already happening, if you must, even though it doesn't make sense, but ask yourself if you've put that same energy into the systemic racial injustices that have long been documented in this country. Cannon Hinnant's murder is a tragedy, but using his death as a political talking point is a travesty. Just stop. Black Lives Matter is an organization that is demanding changes, systemic changes, and trying to get to the root of systemic racism. And somebody who happens to be black shooting somebody who happens to be white and then instantly being arrested and locked away is completely different from cops executing a black man in the street on video and an entire city having to protest and burn a police station down to get people arrested for executing him. And oh, by the way, the last point about justice, just in case you were worrying and you wanted to talk about that justice, 3 of the 4 officers charged in George Floyd's death are now out on bond. They all posted $750,000 bond. They were not held without bail, like the murder in the Cannon Hinnant case. No, they were offered bail, $750,000. But you know what? When you are an affluent cop who lives in an affluent suburb and you belong to a police union and you have access to free lawyers and a bail fund, guess what? You get to go home and hang out with your family for 3 years until there's a trial, assuming that there will be a trial. So when people say they're looking for justice for George Floyd, yeah, they're still looking for justice because justice has barely been done and it's already slipping away.